So, good afternoon and welcome to this week's Leadership for Lunch. And right on cue, somebody else now wants to be admitted. There we go. And topic today is team meetings, specifically how to run an engaging team meeting. Now, if you were on the ball from last week, you might realise that's a change of topic from what I originally had planned, because I did say that this week we would look at why you need a lunch break and what to do with it. And I got into that, and I'm actually putting together an extended toolkit for you to do with what to do with your lunch break. So I'm saving that till next week. And this week we're going to focus on team meetings. So, before I get started with all of that, just a little overview of the session. So, specifically, we're going to look at why you need a team meeting and what the value of it would be for any team, um, how often to do a team meeting and when to do it, how long should it last, and all those sorts of practical things, and how to prepare for your team meeting. So, quite a little checklist for you to help you do your prep so that you don't have to kind of sit there scratching your head looking at a blank sheet of paper. And finally, just a couple of things that I think you can do to take the pressure off yourself if you're running a regular team meeting, because sometimes I know that can feel like a bit of a chore. Okay, so that's roughly what we're going to look at. Um, I think all of you know me, but for people that might be watching the replay who don't know me so well, I'm Diane Lowther, founder of Brilliant Minds and of Leadership for Lunch. My background is all in psychology. I've run my own business, Brilliant Minds, for nearly 30 years now, doing training, doing leadership development, doing executive coaching, and a whole load of other interesting stuff besides. I work mostly in the technology sector, although I do have diverse clients in all sorts of other sectors as well, which is one of the things that keeps it all interesting. If you feel that you would like to have a chat with me about your own situation, about your team, or about anything else that might be of interest, then I'm just going to put the link in the chat box. Well, two links actually. One for you if you want to sign up to get the regular invitations and recordings. She says, trying to find the chat box. There we go. And the other link is to my calendar if you'd like to book a call, and that's free of charge. Okay, so let's get started. I haven't got any slides this week. How about that? I thought this is something that I don't have any models for. I'm just going to talk about what I said. But going back to our leadership model, the idea of team meetings sits very firmly in the lower half of the model. So it's partly about influencing people, and it's partly about inspiring people, very definitely on the others side of the wheel. And people often say to me, oh, it's such a chore and people don't like coming to team meetings and it seems like a waste of an hour of the week and blah, blah, blah. Why should I bother doing a team meeting? And I think there's a number of really important reasons why you should do a team meeting. The first one is that it's your opportunity to create that sense of team, especially with people working from home for some of the working week. And most organizations now, people are working at home at least 1 or 2 days a week. So it's not as if you've got everybody kind of all in the same room together day after day. And of course, there are lots of people who work as part of distributed teams and virtual teams anyway. So your opportunity to get everybody together, is really important, because that's what creates a sense of team. That's what gives people that sense of, I belong to something here. That's what makes them want to get out of bed in the morning and come to work. And I think it's something that a lot of organizations and teams are struggling with since the shift has gone to more home working. Especially during the COVID pandemic lockdowns, there was a lot of people working from home all the time, and the connection and engagement with their employer dropped quite dramatically. So, initially the concern was all, oh, will people actually be productive if they're working at home? And all the research said, yes, they're productive if they work at home. But what people then started to realize about a year down the line was that staff engagement had dropped quite dramatically. It's very easy to become much more transactional when all you're doing is relating to people through a screen. If you get up and get yourself ready and travel somewhere and go into a place of work on a daily basis, you feel much more connected to your employer and to your workmates and to the whole idea of being part of an organization. So your team meeting is that sort of, in miniature, is how you create the sense for people that they belong to something important. And it's one of the places where you define your team culture, what you do and how you treat each other when it's just your team, sets the foundation for how you treat each other on a daily basis. It really is the bedrock of your team culture. But it's also where your team members get to know each other better. I worked with a leadership team a few years ago now, where one of the problems was that the leader said to me, well, everything seems to come through me. So, I've got senior people who all know how to do the job, but somehow I seem to get involved in everything. Everything comes through me. I'm always arbitrating and, mediating between, conflicting agendas and so on. And we talked about this, and I said to him in the end, I said, I think your team is a bit like a wheel, but a wheel that doesn't have a rim. So it's got the hub, that's you, and it's got spokes, but it hasn't got a rim. So there's no connection between your people. And to be fair to him, they did work in different countries. So it wasn't as if they were all coming into the same office every day. But what had happened is that he had strong relationships with each of them individually, but they didn't really have great relationships with each other. So when you have a team meeting, that's an opportunity for your people to get to know each other and build those relationships that ultimately, will mean that they collaborate more, they consult each other more, they support each other more, and it takes you out of the loop for some of the conversations so that you're not in the same position as my old client in that, everything has to come through me. People will get on and do stuff and tell you about it afterwards. I remember that being like a seminal moment in my own business's development. I'd been working for myself over 10 years and mostly, it had just been me. I'd got a few associate trainers and coaches that came in and out and did things. And there came a point when I felt like the business was big enough that I needed some support. And I took on a virtual PA. And I took on somebody to do bookkeeping and financial control and that kind of thing, and also somebody who actually is still with me to help me with the online side of business and website and online marketing and all that kind of stuff. And I went away on holiday, and my VA said to me, "Well, you're not taking your laptop with you, are you?" And I kind of went, "Well, no, I'm not. No." And she said, good, because what's the point in having me if you still have to do everything when you're on holiday? And I thought, yeah, okay, that's good. And I came back from my holiday and we had our catch-up meeting, and she had a list of things that had happened while I was away. And one of them was, she said, oh, and this cropped up with a client, and she said, and I talked to a finance guy about it, and we agreed that what you would want us to do was this, so we did it. I went, perfect. And that was kind of, for me, that was sort of right. My business has grown up now because I don't have to be involved in everything. And I think that's also, that's kind of, as a leader, it's a growing up moment when you realize that you don't have to be involved in everything and that everything doesn't have to go through you, that you can trust your people to do things, because if they understand enough about what your business is all about, what your team's all about, what their job is, then they can make decisions without everything having to come to you. Okay, so that's why I think having a team meeting is really important. Then we come on to, okay, so when do you do it and how often and how long for and all that kind of thing. So there's a little piece here as well, which is another why, but you do it at a regular time. Because if we go back to, some of you were with me when we looked at the neuroscience of leadership, and I talked about the SCARF model. Remember the C in SCARF is certainty. And you can give people a little bit of certainty by always having a team meeting at a regular time. So, if it's weekly, you have it on the same day at the same time. If it's monthly, you have it on, the first Thursday or the last Friday or, whatever you do at the same time. If it's even quarterly, you still have it at a predictable time. So people have some certainty. They know they can trust you. They know that if you say something's going to happen, then it will. So people often say to me, well, how often do I need a team meeting? And it is one of those how long is a piece of string sort of questions, because it depends. My default is do it weekly. And if anybody, has sort of not done this very much, I always say to them, do a weekly team meeting for about 6 weeks, keep notes, review it, and then at the end of 6 weeks, do a proper review. Say, right, is this working? Is it frequently enough? Is it too soon? Is it, are people engaging with it? But unless you've got some evidence, don't just decide that that's too often. I mean, personally, I think, once a week is absolute minimum, but then it does depend a lot on your team. It depends on what kind of business you're in. So let me give you some examples. So back in the early part of my career, I worked in high street fashion retail. So we did have team meetings. We had them every morning and every evening. So everybody would be on the sales floor 5 minutes before the doors opened, and we would have a meeting, which would just be a quick rundown of who's in today, who's coming in to cover the lunch break, have we got any important deliveries, have we got any visitors from head office, are there any kind of specific things to do with customers that need taking care of, because we used to do made to measure suits. So sometimes you might have a customer coming in to collect a suit, and that was a significant purchase, and we always like to make sure that that person felt valued and important when they came in. So it really was just a very, very quick thing. And then at the end of the day, we'd close the shop doors, we'd huddle around again, 5 minutes. How had we done today? Have we made the target? We always had a sales target, yeah. And that was always my opportunity to, say thank you and well done to anybody who'd particularly excelled that day. So 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes at the start, 5 minutes at the end. But for most people, that's too much. But in that environment, it's absolutely what was necessary. Yeah. So think about, how frequently do people need to check in with you? How frequently can people stand to have a meeting? And of course, the more often you do it, the shorter it should be. The complete contrast of that, my first national training role was with Interflora. And so I was head of training for the UK and Ireland, all of Ireland. And there was a reshuffle, and I inherited a team of field-based quality control people who hadn't reported to me, but the manager in charge of that team got made redundant, and the general manager said, right, they're going to report to you from now on. And there's a whole story around that, because I did initially say to him, I have a full-time job, thank you very much. But in the end, I had to do it. And so we used to have a quarterly meeting, because these were people who were scattered all over the UK. So, and their job was to be out and about visiting member shops. So, you couldn't get them together for a weekly meeting. Even a monthly meeting was a bit of a stretch. So we used to have a quarterly meeting, but it would be a full day. So they would all travel the day before, we'd have a full day, we'd go through everything we needed to go through. They would stay overnight, go out for dinner together, build the team a bit, and then go home the next day. So, that made sense in that environment. But the other thing I did with that team is they used to get a weekly update from me. Now I'm going back. I've just told you I've had my own business for nearly 30 years. So I'm going back more than 30 years, when email was sort of a glint in the IT director's eye. It didn't really exist. But we did have this kind of primitive form of email, which was known as the messenger system. And my predecessor had started this thing where, we do a weekly update. But if there wasn't anything to say, then he didn't bother sending anything. So I kind of made it a rule that on a Friday, I would always send a message out to this whole team. And it would be updates, things that had happened in head office, new members, anything that they might need to know about. And if there wasn't anything, I used to send them a message anyway, just to make something up, not in the sense of, false news, but I remember one time, it was April, and I remember going, this week was Shakespeare's birthday. Here's one of my favorite quotes, and it was just kind of, just to say, I'm here, I haven't forgotten about you, you're still important, even if there was nothing to say. Yeah. So that's, a balance between infrequent meetings, but also keeping in contact with people. So the exceptions to a weekly meeting would be, if you're in a very fast-paced environment, you might want them more frequently. If your team's distributed across a big geographical area, then you might not be able to have them very frequently. It might be monthly or quarterly. And then, there's other exceptions. I'm thinking, during the first lockdown, when we were all kind of reeling with, what's going on here, for the first couple of weeks, I met with my team at least every week, and sometimes we had 2 meetings a week. And partly just to keep ourselves sort of, focused on something, give a bit of structure to the week. But then it started to be, okay, so now how do we cope with this new reality? And I remember spending one quite lengthy meeting learning how to use all the whistles and bells inside that version of Zoom, which was a lot of fun. Okay, so that's what I think about, how frequently. How long you meet for depends on how frequently you meet. Don't fall into the trap of thinking it has to be an hour. A weekly meeting might only be 15 minutes. It depends how much you've got to talk about. It depends on the purpose of the meeting. And yes, I'm going to come back to purpose. So my preparation checklist, and I'm going to give you a link to download this if you would like to. Just stick that in the chat. Yeah, just realized the other one didn't send. So you got all 3 links at the same time. So the preparation checklist starts with purpose. So what's the purpose of your team meeting? And there's 2 levels to this. There's in general, why do you have a team meeting? That might be, we have a team meeting just as a touch point for the week, just so we all get to see each other and say hello. But then there's what's the purpose of this specific meeting? Okay, see everybody leaning forward now to get to click the link. Is it downloading okay? Give me a thumbs up if you've managed to get it. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Good. So purpose of the meeting, overall, why do we have a team meeting? And then why are we having this meeting? What do I want to get out of it? So that's the important thing. And then it's really about content, like, what are we going to do with this meeting? So I would start with what's current for this team. So what's been going on? What are we thinking about, talking about, worrying about, looking forward to? Start with those things. And then, what do people need to know about those things? Is there anything that they want to discuss? Anything that, that you want to talk to them about, or they want to talk to you about? So, if you've got a major project going on, then it may be that you've got some important milestones and you want to talk about, are we going to meet the milestones? Or maybe you've missed a milestone and you want to talk about how you recover from that. Or maybe you've actually achieved a milestone ahead of target and you want to talk about how did we do that and can we continue to do it so that we get ahead on the whole project? Or did we just miscalculate how long that particular part of the project was going to take? Are there things changing? And often in a large organization, there'll be things you kind of get a whisper, that something might be going to change and people start to get a bit unsettled. So a team meeting's a perfect opportunity to address that kind of thing. Even if you don't know very much more than they do, just to say, yes, I've heard the rumors as well. I don't know anything more than you do, but as soon as I know something, I'll let you know. Just reassure people. Because transparency is a big concern for a lot of people in large organizations. And if they think that you're hiding something, then it does tend to undermine trust. Sometimes you might say, there are some things that I know, but I'm not at liberty to tell you yet, but I will as soon as I'm allowed to. Now that can be a little bit awkward because people think, oh, you know something, but you're not telling it. But most people will respect the fact that sometimes you can't say everything that you know. Sometimes you have to wait for certain other things to happen before you're able to actually divulge all of the details. So that's how you look at content, is what's actually going on. Now, you might have some standard things that go in every week's agenda. So you might need an update from everybody about what they're doing, and that should be a sort of quick once round the group, 5 minutes each at most, what's going on. But I would say, make sure that it's not just a case of everybody giving updates, because at some point somebody's going to say, why don't we just email this to each other? course, the answer to that is because nobody would read it. But but somebody will ask that or make that observation if all you're doing is having people give updates. So you need to make the meeting dynamic. You need to make sure that you're accomplishing something within the meeting. You're using that time together to do something constructive. Yeah. And then the question is, how do I make it engaging? So as the leader, don't make it all about you. If you're just talking, then people will get bored quite quickly. So it's going to take a bit of preparation. It's going to be about, how do I introduce topics for discussion, or how do I share the airtime around to give different people an opportunity to do things. And then you'll see at the bottom of the page, I put, sharing, because again, your team meetings shouldn't be all about you as a leader any more than your team should be all about you as a leader. Yeah? And I think sharing around the responsibility for making it work is a really good thing to do. So, for one thing, have a shared agenda. So you can do a shared document and get people, between meetings to add things to the agenda or suggestions for things to put to the agenda. You can reserve the right to say, I think this is useful. I think maybe that's going to take more time, or we need to do this more urgently, or, you can still kind of edit what goes into that document, but at least you're receiving people's suggestions. So that's one aspect of sharing. The other one is, give other people the opportunity to chair the meeting instead share the chair. Because sometimes as a leader, it might feel like a lot of pressure that, every time you've got to come up with an agenda, you've got to chair the meeting, you've got to make sure everybody's contributing. And that can feel, quite stressful, especially if you're busy doing other things. So, you might do this around everybody in your team, or you might just ask for volunteers, or you could choose more senior members of staff who, have the experience or are ready to develop into this kind of role, and give them the opportunity to chair the meeting. It's a really nice, safe place to chair your first meeting because you're amongst friends. You're doing something that you've seen done lots of times. And yeah, it's probably quite exciting, and it's a good developmental opportunity for people in your team. Now, of course, the first time somebody does it, you're going to need to spend a bit of time with them, helping them just get in the right frame of mind and understand what it is that they're going to be doing. And also you'll want to debrief them afterwards. So, if you're really tight for time, you might be thinking, well, that's not going to save me any time, is it? But think of it as an investment. Anything that develops your people is always an investment. It takes time to start with, but then once they're up and running, you'll be able to just say to someone, oh, would you like to chair the meeting this week? Yeah. Or you can literally just have everybody take turns. So if you've got 6 people in the team, everybody does one every 6 weeks. Depends on whether or not you've got people, who you think might not be ready to do that, or might be, just not quite confident enough yet. So, that's up to you and your people how you make that happen. But that's a good way of kind of, taking some of the pressure off yourself. And then the other thing that I think is worth sharing is think about from time to time inviting some of your key stakeholders to one of your team meetings. So this is more for people in large organizations, but it might also apply to smaller businesses where you might occasionally invite a key customer or a supplier, somebody that you do a lot of business with, invite them to come to one of your team meetings. And it doesn't have to be for the whole meeting, but it can be a really good way of building the relationship between you and some of your key stakeholders. You might ask them to come in and present something about what they do so that your team understand and it's easier for them to engage with the stakeholder. Or you might do it the other way around and, do a presentation specifically for the benefit of that stakeholder. Or it might be a bit of both. Or you might just invite somebody along as a guest just to observe what you do and meet the team and get to know everybody a little bit. That's another way that you can use your team meetings to create that sense of being part of a winning team, and also, to build your team culture and influence people a little bit outside of your immediate sphere as well. Okay, so I've romped through all of that. Any questions about running a team meeting? Any yes buts or what ifs? Kate, I think you're the only one that I know who regularly does run a team meeting.
Yeah, we do monthly ones for the whole team
Yeah.
because we do it monthly because everyone works different days and times.
Hmm.
And so to get everyone in means some people have to come in especially for the meeting. So we just do
Yeah.
that once a month. But I do a weekly update. So it goes out either sort of
Hmm.
Sunday night or first thing Monday, just what's happening for the week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a quarterly bigger
Hmm.
event.
Yeah. And
Which
you've
we had
got
last
people on
week.
two sites as well, haven't you? So that's another complication.
We only tend to meet with sort of two separate teams still at the moment. So
Hmm.
yeah, we let's make this the Kenilworth Clinic where we've got a very structured meeting schedule, and
Yeah.
we use the Lion format. So last month review,
Hmm.
what's the I? I can't
Do it so often you can't remember it. Yeah.
yeah, something opportunities. I
Yeah.
is ah it'll come to me in a minute.
Hmm.
Opportunities and then N for next month. So
Yeah.
LION.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're
and that
starting with looking backwards, then looking at the present, and then looking to the future.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like the idea of making it a shared document so that people can add to it. Because
Hmm.
I try and remember to print it out the week before, and then people might scribble things on it, but then I don't see it till the day. So yeah, to make it a shared document is a really good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah. And it's also, you might find that will perhaps cut down some of the sort of ad hoc noise that can go on in a team where somebody
Mm.
suddenly thinks something's important and they start pestering everybody about it. If they can
Mm.
just put it on the agenda for the next team meeting, then they're then kind of settling, right, that's been taken care of. I know we're going to get to it.
Yes.
And then they can focus back on, whatever they're supposed to be doing instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use for incidents and
Ah, right.
opportunities.
Okay. So last month, incidents, opportunities, next month.
Yes,
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I've not come across that before. Yeah.
that was an action coach thing.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, observations?
I suppose that I've got one. I'm wondering about how do you get it? You mentioned how in the model it's like the bottom two quadrants,
Hmm.
and you mentioned at the beginning, like at COVID, the research showed people were very productive, but they began to lack engagement,
Yeah.
and I found that quite interesting. How do you retain your productivity when there's a lack of engagement? And so I guess what I'm wondering is, how do you get it so people actually want to turn up for team meetings on a regular basis? For the first maybe kind of 6 months or a couple of quarters, maybe quite easy to
Yeah.
get people enthusiastic, get people really engaged and what have you. But I can imagine, well, I know from my own personal experience, they can degenerate into quite transactional kind of moments, especially if you don't have the top part of the quadrant. When well, why are we here? And
Yes.
and the leader has great, the leader does develop does demonstrate great kind of self-awareness and understanding of what's going on, not just with him or her, but also with the whole team as well.
Yeah.
One model I quite like is Chris Argaris, and his, model one, where it's all kind of single loop learning and very transactional. But then model two, where people are encouraged to genuinely talk about what's really on their mind. And
Yeah.
of course, the danger is that there's a risk factor there because, of course, it can all explode and go really pear-shaped and what have you. But sometimes it can be really quite constructive, I guess, and you can really get to what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I
You
mean
understand
by
what I'm getting at?
creating, that's what I mean
Yeah.
by creating team culture
Mm,
is creating something where people feel that they are part of a winning team.
mm,
And creating that psychological safety so that if something really isn't working, somebody can bring that to the team meeting and talk about it.
mm,
Yeah.
mm.
And yes, they can become a bit stale. So I would also recommend changing the format from time to time, introducing new things. And I think this is also where rotating the chair helps, because even if they follow roughly the same structure, if somebody only gets to do this every couple of months, then they will put more energy and effort into it. It will be a more interesting meeting than you could make it if you're doing it every week and running out of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yes, I think you're right that the first few months sometimes, it's quite exciting and people are interested in it, but it can become stale unless you change things around.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you can always use a bit of bribery. So, just going back to my Interflora days, I joined the company sometime sort of towards the end of May. And I think I had 7 people in my team, and one of them was away on a fortnight's holiday. So I didn't meet her for the first 2 weeks. And then she came back from her holiday and somebody else went on holiday. And I went off on holiday somewhere in the middle, and the PA who had served my predecessor decided she didn't want to work with me and moved on, so I had to recruit somebody else. And meanwhile, other people were having holidays. And it was somewhere in the middle of September when my new PA had been there for a couple of weeks, and nobody was on holiday. And I said to my PA at the time, wow, this is the first time since I took over the job that I've had the whole team in the office. I think this calls for a celebration. So I sent her out to the local bakery to buy donuts. And we had a sort of joint tea break, and everybody had donuts, and we just sat and chatted, and we kind of had a very informal team meeting that day. And that kind of became a habit. It's part of our team culture, that somebody would say somewhere in the morning, oh, it's a donut day, we're all here. And it wasn't always me that bought the donuts, somebody else might go and buy the donuts. But as soon as we realized everybody was in the office, because it didn't happen very often, a lot of people had jobs that took them out and about, it would be a donut day. So that's what I mean by bribery. Sometimes you got to add a little extra something.
Yeah, that reminds me. I don't have a team right now because now I'm going solo. But when I used to work, I would bring cake all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 weeks before the meeting, they keep asking me, what kind of cake are you bringing? What kind of cake are you bringing? The team culture is really always informal,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always joyful. And if there's something that's really serious, it gets dealt with really quickly.
Yeah.
Because everybody's just wanting to have the cake.
Everybody wants the cake.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
But I think you make a really important point there, though, Marlon,
Sorry.
is that it comes the culture of the team comes from the leader, and if you genuinely enjoy working with your people, and you want to listen to them, and you're interested in their point of view, that will come through in the way that you run the meetings. As soon as you start to feel like this is a weekly chore, they will also feel like it's a weekly chore. So, I'm coming back to, again, everything comes back to the leader, and your self-development is, if you are not enjoying your team meetings, then that's a bit of incongruence that you need to deal with, and need to get your head in the right place so that you can do a better job. And that's how it all works. Okay, so it's 10 to 2 again. Lovely to see you all here. And next week, I am definitely going to do why you need a lunch break and what to do with it. And I'm going to paint the picture for you of the perfect lunch break. So I'll look forward to seeing you then.